Hello, everyone. Welcome to a not special episode of Uncanny Treks. We are talking about episode 7 of season 3 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. It is entitled What is Starfleet? I am Bob in Cascadia. That is Matt in the Southland. Matt, how you doing this evening?
Doing okay, Bob. Man, I hate to say it. This episode of Strange New Worlds, probably the worst I've seen of Strange New Worlds.
Definitely, I would say the worst of Strange New Worlds. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and spoil a review from the reaction section we do at the end. Somebody posted on Serialized, and I thought this was pretty funny. Strange New Lows.
Which is odd because even at a low, Strange New Worlds is not bad.
A lot of people seem to think the writing of this was really bad, especially spoilers, everyone, obviously. Especially the way it muddles its critique of Starfleet and retreats on its critique of Starfleet. That didn't bother me so much. I would not go so far as to say I think this is bad, but definitely this is the weakest Strange New Worlds episode. I appreciate their commitment to trying new things and to taking new styles and embodying those styles. That's one of the things I like about the show. I'm glad they do that. They're not always going to make me over the moon, so that's fine. But yeah, before this, would you agree that that Elysian Kingdom episode was the weakest?
Yes, even though that was a fun episode.
I even liked it slightly more than you, but we both had it pegged as the weakest, and so this is the new weakest.
That episode was most likely to be turned into an animated series episode.
An animated series episode, it would be great if adapted into a children's storybook.
In this particular episode, What is Starfleet? Ortega's little brother films a documentary of the crew reflecting on Starfleet's values and mission while escorting cargo to a war-torn planet. Now, Bob, from the start of this episode, did you like this documentary better than the season 2 Babylon 5 episode, And Now for a Word?
You know, that's an interesting point, and maybe I should have taken a little bit of time and gone back and rewatched that. Although I forgot. There's another Babylon 5 connection you're going to make later in the show that I did remember. I hadn't remembered this until you brought it up. I think probably the Babylon 5 one was better. If I remember correctly, the Babylon 5 one got to more interesting things about its characters, advanced the story a little bit, and also was a much more pointed critique of what it was portraying.
From a viewer's standpoint, as I was watching a documentary, I liked the style of And Now for a Word way more than what is going on here with Ortega's little brother, who seems like a YouTube area.
Oh, interesting. This seems YouTube to you.
It seems very just amateurish.
It does seem amateurish. So this is the distinction I was thinking. You're right that they're both documentaries, but I remember And Now for a Word from Babylon 5 as being specifically a parody of that type of short documentary film that your CNN or your CBS or your Fox makes. Whereas what I think this is a parody of, although it's interesting and maybe it's a parody of both, or maybe it's more parody of the YouTube style of documentary, but there's a whole genre, or at least there used to be. I think it's really died out as film has died out, but and it's probably mostly moved to YouTube. But there used to be a whole genre of advocacy or progressive documentaries, right, about American foreign policy or bad environmental pollution, where some earnest progressive goes around with a camera, inserts themselves in it a lot, and shows you a social problem. And what Ortega's little brother is doing in this reminded me a lot more of that than Fox News or CNN documentary.
The other thing too, with the camera angles and everything that are used here within this documentary, the style itself just comes off as what you're talking about. But that was also amateurish at the time. You have amateur filmmakers going out and putting those type of documentaries together, whereas with CNN, you've got professional news teams going out.
So, and some of these progressive advocacy documentaries I'm describing are made very amateurishly, and some aren't. Yeah. You're right that there's a lot of awkward high angles in this, and my God, the close-ups are awful. The close-ups in this are awful. Now, they work for what they're trying to convey, but it's unpleasant. It's an unpleasant genre, so it's unpleasant to experience, even if it's accurately processing this amateurish advocacy documentary.
The other problem with the close-ups, too, is that Beto actually takes the camera, these are these floating drone cameras, and moves them closer to the person's face instead of zooming in, which is weird. It seems a strange distinction, but it's clearly noticed. Why in that century do they not have the zoom technology they need to get those better angles?
In the utopian 23rd century, shouldn't humans' aesthetic sense be a little more refined?
It wasn't just Beto's cameras. He also pulled footage from like the security cameras on the Enterprise. There's security cameras apparently everywhere. There's one in the captain's chair. There's one at Ortega's at the con. Everybody's being watched all the time. It freaked me out a little bit. It's scary.
It's a modern workplace, man.
We do have cameras where I work all over the place, but no one's really watching them. But I guess they could request that footage.
That would be one angle about the cameras, is to say that it's a modern workplace, Matt. And he gets these from FOIA. You were going to ask me, oh man, how do you feel that you can just request security footage from the Enterprise or the Discovery from FOIA? And I would say, Matt, what do you think Star Trek is as a show? How do you think they get this footage? It is interesting using that security camera angles and perspective, which looks awful.
Oh, it looks terrible. But that's the other thing with the documentary piece. That looked bad. We have that issue going on here with the documentary piece. There were a couple of things I did like. I did like the fast-paced footage of Leanne handling all the weapons.
I liked it.
It had that karate master showing off his moves type.
It had the energy of a guy who has set the camera up for a YouTube video, moved off to demonstrate a move, and then screws up.
That's exactly what it was. It was a dude in a Napoleon Dynamite, Uncle Rico, when he sets up the camera to throws the football. Same idea. Same energy.
Yeah, very similar energy. Beyond the many aesthetically called for, given the genre, but uncomfortable camera choices and editing choices, the show is trying to get across that Pike and Number One, not the actors, but the characters, are really bad on camera. That seems to be what they're going for. Whereas Spock, Leon, Uhura, and Erica Ortegas are all weird on camera, but they all are really into what they're talking about. And so there's an authenticity there where Pike and Number One just come across as stilted, propagandized robots for the Federation.
They're nervous doing their jobs in front of the camera because they know the sensitivity of the actual mission itself and are keeping more to themselves, keeping the cards closer to their hand. I do feel Spock seemed the most annoyed at being filmed, especially on the bridge.
I didn't notice that so much on the bridge. A vocal segment of people who may be a minority don't like the new Spock and they think he's too emotional. And I usually don't agree with that. In this episode, it really does give those people grist for their complaints, where we just see Spock trauma dumping to this random document. Yep. He's in his quarters just telling this awful story about his friend not being able to hang out with him anymore on Vulcan and him self-harming. And I can see where the anti-new Spock people are coming from on that. But by the other token, I can also see, well, Spock's going to share what seems logical and relevant to share, and if that involves trauma dumping, it would be illogical to let a term like trauma dumping prevent you from trauma dumping.
This actually is a full circle moment to some degree because it goes back, and I didn't remember this myself, but I looked it up. There's a Discovery episode where Spock's father, Sarek, says that there were times where Spock would go off days at a time and he didn't know where he went. Well, guess what Spock was doing, Bob? Spock was out there self-harming himself.
I'm glad you brought that up. I vaguely remembered that had been touched on earlier in the show or in Discovery Season 2, but I'd forgotten that it was Sarek specifically saying that. Yeah. One thing I did think this episode did accomplish that was pretty interesting was it does really bring across the way documentaries can be selective or misrepresentative, especially the way Beto is doing this documentary. It makes Uhura being thirsty for him and Erica being annoyed with him, but somehow he manages to present it as this more general presentation of who they are as people, which is not quite right. It's just them responding to a guy they know with a camera. And I thought that dynamic was somewhat interesting. Documentaries and fictional portrayals of documentaries don't always get that, but here I thought they got that pretty well.
They're not quite the character they're supposed to be. Benny's using that to shape the narrative.
One little bit of trivia, and I'm not sure about this, but this episode explicitly says a Vulcan mind meld was something that Surak really spread its use in Vulcan society and taught people how to logically control themselves to do it. And I don't know if that's a new insight or not. That might not be an aspect of canon that's been established before, which if it is a new dimension, that's interesting.
I did do a little bit of research just because I was curious, and I did find out that the mind meld was actually invented because CBS and the censors refused to let McCoy use a truth ray of some sort.
Oh, interesting. That's interesting.
But they didn't like the truth ray.
When you bring that up, though, it does really stress how low budget the Vulcan mind meld is. You're saying it's more of a content concern, but it also might just be a budget.
They just say, okay, well, we can't do that, so let's just take Spock's hand and put it on the guy's face. All right, sounds good.
Well, speaking of things maybe learned, Matt, look, I knew Mbingo obviously was already a super soldier, Secret Service, killer, whatever. But did they actually say that his nickname was the Ghost in earlier episodes? I didn't remember that.
That under the cloak of war in the last season, the Klingon dude that they bring on the ship calls him, refers to him as the Ghost. Now, one thing in the med lab, Bob, that drove me insane, and I laughed out loud at the TV, having the word flatline come across the screen when someone's dead. What was, what was that?
Speaking of people who maybe need to change their practices, man, Chapel, maybe she should ease up on her not even X. She wouldn't even define Spock as her X.
She's all up in his business.
Matt, was the documentary being so sustainedly anti-Starfleet, did you also have the feeling about 20 minutes in that, oh, okay, this is going to turn out to be a vindication of Starfleet in the end?
Something's going to turn it around for sure. Either that or I thought maybe Beta would die on film.
Oh, interesting. Although that maybe that would be too much a repetition of our loss of the nurse a couple episodes ago.
Right. Can't lose all these new characters.
We are done with Beto for this season, I think.
I'm pretty sure. I don't think we'll go back to him.
If we never went back to Beto, I'm not saying I would be very sore about that.
Well, one character we're not completely done with is Batel, because Batel was at the dinner party at the end of the episode. And also Ortegas, building a motorcycle on a spaceship.
Well, Matt, that was also a Babylon 5 echo. Was that Garibaldi and Lanier doing that?
Yeah, Garibaldi and Lanier.
I was half expecting Matt to be, well, it makes sense on a space station, but on a spaceship, it's just outrageous.
Oh, no, you could ride it on top of the saucer. If you were watching this documentary, let's pretend you're just a regular dude in the Star Trek universe. And I think I ask the same thing anytime we cover a documentary episode. Would you have liked this documentary watching it? And what level do you think this documentary would be? Is this a YouTube level documentary, or would you see something like this on Fox Nation, CNN, HBO? What do you think?
Well, this goes in directions you probably don't want to. But for me, this raises a couple of things. So on the one hand, I don't watch documentaries or cable news. I get my news from articles online and from the podcast. I deeply hate the whole aesthetic of documentaries and of cable news. I hate it. And so a couple of things come up here. One is that in the 23rd century, in a communist society, which I believe Star Trek is, on the one hand, I like to believe that in this utopian future, there is no CNN or Fox. And in fact, it's forbidden to do CNN or Fox. There's specific laws because there should be laws. This awful, brain-rotting, uninformative, biased political coverage should not be allowed. On the one hand, I don't want this to even exist in the future, let alone in the communist future that I believe Star Trek is. On the other hand, maybe the equivalents in the future of Star Trek would be better. Maybe the cable news equivalent would be better and would actually be informative and would not be this really manipulative, really schlocky attempt to just keep you tuned in and drive ratings. In which case, maybe I would find it useful and maybe I would keep watching it. But then another thing you have to consider, though, and I've often joked about this, is I really don't like neoconservatives, Matt. I don't like the type of people who like Fox News, who like John Bolton, who are super concerned about American national security interest, all that stuff. I'm very anti-neoconservative. But if we lived in a socialist society, I would be very conservative in the sense that I would always be, what does my society need to do to advance its influence? Who are the traitors criticizing my socialist government, my communist government? And how can I call them traitors to get them to shut up? That sort of stuff. So maybe in a weird way, in the Star Trek communist utopia, I would be a Fox News viewer. Does that make sense?
Going back to what I was talking about with the documentary, Bob, I'm going to say it's pretty amateurish. It's on that YouTube level. Whereas you, on the other hand, if you lived in Star Trek universe, you'd probably be watching Fox News. Gotcha.
I would be watching the Star Trek equivalent of Fox News.
And I highly doubt this documentary would be on the Fox News.
Yeah. And I would be accusing you of being a cheese-eating surrender monkey for not being sufficiently militant. I would be the type of guy standing up and applauding Starfleet officers when they get off the plane.
Yeah, I'm offended because I'm eating Ritz cheese crackers right now, Bob, as we speak.
Are you French, Matt? I knew it.
All right, Bob. Beto's been taking footage of the last several episodes, but then he didn't use any of that footage in his documentary. This could have been a clip show if they really wanted to.
Did you want it to be a clip show, though?
I was so disappointed with Star Trek Next Generation's clip show.
Was that one called Touch of Grey?
They were doing surgery on Riker or something.
And was that that was the end of season 1, or was it season 2?
I don't think you do a clip show with just one season.
My last observation, Matt, before we go into characters of the week, is I do like that the Lutani have doctors commanding warships. That's somewhat interesting. I don't think we've ever seen that from a Star Trek alien species before.
Well, Bob, my character of the week goes to Uhura, and it's for throwing Beto off the bridge. That was a cool move on her part.
Oh, you found a good reason to justify that, because when you said Uhura, I was, man, I love Uhura, but she was generally too cringy and too thirsty for me.
Well, that was the issue. That was the issue I had. But then I was like, when I saw her having to throw him off the bridge, she's like, I'm sorry. She still knows she has to do her job. Good job.
Even though Pike is amazing, I don't think we often pick him for character of the week because it feels cheating, right?
Yeah.
Like picking Superman in the Superman show, as it were. But I'm going to go ahead and pick him for this episode, both because it's a week and because I really did like the moment where he finds his charisma for the documentary camera and he tells Beto, I think I can confidently say that that's classified. And that really cracked me up. That was pretty witty.
So if this episode wasn't shot in this documentary form, let's just say it was a regular episode and they added a little more flair to it, do you think it would have been a good episode without the documentary portion?
Could have been. I don't know if you're only making 10 episodes a season. I don't know if this is the plot you go with absent having a gimmick like the documentary.
Yeah, like I'm curious. They would have had to put something extra into it just to make it more, but the plot itself is not that bad. If we had a 20 episode run, then it'd probably be fine.
I didn't look at the runtime of this compared to other episodes specifically, but I got the sense this is one of the shorter episodes of Strange New Worlds.
All right, Bob, what about your reaction of the week?
My reaction of the week, Matt, besides I found somebody saying Strange New Lows, which I thought was pretty good, as I already said. And then I did like this review on Serialized. Men will literally make a documentary expose before going to therapy.
That's pretty good.
Well, listeners, I think we've got 3 episodes left of Strange New Worlds. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. Join us as we round out this season 3 of Strange New Worlds. And you heard that it's renewed for season 4 and 5, Matt?
That is correct.
You know how many episodes are going to be in season 4?
I hope 10.
10. But do you know how many are going to be in the final season?
I hope 10.
Nah.
6.
Apparently, Paramount Plus was really trying to just do a movie or do 2 movies. They negotiated it to 6.
4 more episodes is just too expensive.
Just too expensive. And this has seemed obvious for a while, but I'd never seen it written about as news before the past couple of weeks. But it does seem they're explicitly talking about setting up what they're calling Star Trek Year 1.
Oh, and that's going to
be the original. The Kirkin project. Oh. Who knows if they'll actually do it? It seemed pretty obvious to me they were setting up that Star Trek Legacy show with Seven and Rafi and Picard's boy, and they never pulled the trigger on it. So who knows if they'll actually do it? It feels a little more solid than Star Trek Legacy, but I'm not saying it's for sure. Well, thanks for joining us on this Strange New Worlds journey, listeners. We'll see you for the last 3 episodes. I'm Bob in Cascadia. That's Matt in the Southland. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks for listening.